They say nothing good ever comes in the mail anymore. Bills, jury duty, cheap coupons for things you don't need. But on a gray Tuesday morning, Luke Whitaker opened an envelope that would change his and his daughter's life forever. At first, he thought it was a scam. The letter was printed on thick, cream-colored paper, the kind that feels too expensive to be real. The return address was from a law firm in Asheville, North Carolina, a town Luke had never been to, from people he had never heard of. But the words inside were clear as day. Per the final will and testament of Margaret Ellis, you, Luke Whitaker, and your daughter Emmie are the designated recipients of her greenhouse property and its contents, located at 118 Wren Hollow Road. Luke blinked, reread the letter 3 times, and muttered, "Who the hell is Margaret Ellis?" His daughter Emmie stood by the kitchen table in her pajamas, chewing on a piece of toast with peanut butter and jelly. "Did we win something?" she asked. Luke shook his head slowly, still staring at the paper. "No, baby, we were gifted something, a whole greenhouse." 3 days later, they drove out to the property. The address led them through winding back roads, past cow pastures and old barns with chipped red paint, until they reached the edge of Wren Hollow, a forgotten little patch of land where even the birds seemed to sing slower. The greenhouse sat tucked behind an old wooden gate wrapped in thorny vines. It was tall, almost cathedral-like, with a peaked glass roof and wrought iron doors. Years of dust dulled the glass, and ivy had crept up the sides like it was trying to reclaim it. Luke's first instinct was to turn around. The place looked haunted, but Emmie stepped forward, her sneakers crunching on gravel. "Dad," she whispered, "it's beautiful." She was right. Even in its state of disrepair, the greenhouse had a magic to it, a kind of stillness, like something was holding its breath, waiting to exhale. Inside, it smelled like old earth, dried leaves, and something faintly sweet, like the last breath of a forgotten flower. There were shelves full of ceramic pots, glass bottles with faded labels, and rows of rusted garden tools. In the far corner sat an old wooden bench, its paint peeled and cracked from sun and time. And on that bench, a notebook. Luke picked it up carefully. The cover was soft brown leather, embossed with initials. Emmie. He flipped it open. The handwriting inside was small, elegant, and neat. "This place belongs to her now. The girl with eyes like spring. Let her grow what she sees, not what she's told." Luke stared at the words. "What in the world does that mean?" Emmie tugged on his jacket sleeve. "Dad, can we keep it? Can we fix it up, grow something?" Luke laughed. "Sweetheart, I can barely keep a cactus alive." "But I can try," she said, her eyes wide and serious. And for a moment, in the soft dappled light coming through the dusty glass ceiling, Luke felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. They started coming every afternoon after school. At first, it was just about clearing out the debris, sweeping the dirt-streaked tiles, hauling out broken pots, scrubbing the walls clean. Emmie was tireless, humming to herself as she worked, making up little songs for the seeds she imagined planting. Luke patched up the cracked glass panes with anything he could find at the local salvage yard. People in town started noticing. The lady at the hardware store asked what he was fixing up. The old guy at the gas station asked if he was bringing the Ellis place back to life. Everyone seemed to know the name Margaret Ellis, even if they didn't know her story. Luke didn't care about any of that. For the first time since Emmie's mom left, his daughter was smiling more, talking more, blooming just like the place they were rebuilding. One afternoon, Luke leaned against the greenhouse wall, drinking from a bottle of sweet tea, watching his daughter dig little holes in a row. She looked up and said, "I don't want to plant them in rows. That's boring." Luke raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She stood up and walked to the center of the greenhouse, dragging a stick in the dirt behind her. She drew a spiral, then another, then a wavy circle. "I think they'll grow better if they feel happy." Luke chuckled. "Is that a scientific method?" She grinned. "It's the flower girl's way." He didn't have the heart to correct her. It wasn't hurting anyone. And hey, if you're loving stories like this, about strong dads, magical moments, and second chances, go ahead and subscribe to Hero Dad Stories. We've got more heartwarming mysteries just like this one. 3 weeks later, the first sprout appeared. It was unlike anything Luke had seen before. Deep violet petals with silver veins. The center shimmered gold when it caught the light. Emmie called it a starling bloom. And it wasn't alone to Wagung. By the end of the month, the entire greenhouse floor had exploded in color. Unusual shapes, glowing hues, scents that reminded Luke of childhood summers and late-night campfires. These weren't your average daisies or marigolds. Luke took a picture on his phone, Emmie kneeling among the flowers, a sunbeam hitting her face just right, and posted it to his barely used Instagram with the caption, "Little garden boss doing her thing." He didn't think much of it. But the next morning, he had 4,000 new followers. By the weekend, they were on the local news. People began driving in and from nearby towns to see the magic flowers. Influencers asked for photo ops. Florists emailed asking to buy seeds. One woman offered $10,000 for a single cutting. Luke didn't know what to make of it. He just wanted a quiet life. Just him and Emmie and their weird little greenhouse. But something told him, deep in his gut, that this was only the beginning. And somewhere beneath the dirt, deep in the roots of those flowers, was a story still waiting to grow. The mornings came earlier now. Luke had never been much of a morning person, but these days he was up with the sun, sometimes even before it, sitting on a folding chair just outside the greenhouse, coffee in hand, watching the mist roll over the hills behind Wren Hollow. Inside, Emmie was already barefoot in the soil, checking on her flower babies. She talked to them like friends, named each one. There was Luna with its ghost-white petals that opened only at dusk, and Button, a puffy yellow bloom with a scent that made Luke think of fresh sugar cookies. And of course, Starling, the firstborn, as Emmie called it, the deep purple flower that started it all. Luke didn't know if what they were growing had any real scientific value, but he did know it had changed his daughter. She had always been imaginative, sure, but this was different. She was calmer, more focused, more herself, like this place was waking up something inside her. And maybe, Luke thought, it was waking up something inside him too. The internet, however, had different ideas. After that first viral photo, Luke's inbox turned into a mess of journalists, sponsorship offers, and requests from botanists. Someone from a university in Oregon wanted to conduct a field study. Another guy claimed he was a plant influencer and asked if he could collab. Luke barely knew how to work his phone, let alone handle media requests. He ignored most of them. But people didn't stop showing up. Strangers started parking along the dirt road leading to the greenhouse. They walked up with cameras and iced lattes, posing like it was a pop-up art gallery. Some asked to buy flowers, others just wanted the vibe. Luke didn't mind, at first. But one morning he found a woman leaning over the garden bed, plucking petals off Luna and stuffing them into a little Ziploc bag. "Excuse me," Luke said, stepping through the greenhouse door. "Oh, sorry," the woman said with a fake laugh. "I'm just collecting samples. I do essential oils." Luke stood still, calm, but his voice was firm. "This isn't a public park." The woman hesitated, then smiled like she hadn't heard him. "But your daughter said these flowers are magic, right? I read it online. They're supposed to help dreams come true or something." Luke didn't answer, just opened the gate wide and gestured toward the gravel road. By that night, he and Emmie had put up a small wooden sign, "Private property. Respect the flowers." Back home, Emmie sat cross-legged on her bed with the old leather notebook in her lap, the one with the initials M.E. She had discovered something new that morning. Several pages in the back that looked blank during the day had begun revealing ink under the silver light of her bedside lamp. "It's like moonlight wakes it up," she told Luke. He peered over her shoulder. Faint words were appearing line by line like ghosts being summoned. "The soil speaks, but not in words. You must listen differently. Trust the spiral. That's how the roots remember their way home." Luke rubbed his face. "Sounds like fortune cookie poetry." Emmie didn't laugh. "It's like she left me instructions," she whispered. "Who?" "The flower woman, Margaret Ellis." Luke glanced at her. "You know she passed away before we ever met her, right?" Emmie nodded, "but I think she knew me somehow, like a long time ago." Luke didn't know how to respond to that. He just pulled the covers up over her and kissed her forehead. "Sleep tight, flower girl." 2 days later, something odd happened. Luke had just finished unloading mulch from the back of his pickup when he noticed all the flowers leaning to one side. Not just toward the sun, that was normal. They were leaning toward the door. He stood still, shovel in hand, staring at them. It was subtle but unmistakable, like a silent crowd turning their heads all at once. Later that night, he returned with a flashlight and walked the perimeter. Nothing out of place, no signs of animals, no damage. But the moment he stepped inside, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. It wasn't cold, but he shivered. And then he noticed something else. The wooden bench in the corner, the one where they first found the notebook, was clean. Too clean, like someone had wiped it down. Back at home, Luke pulled out his laptop and searched Margaret Ellis plus Wren Hollow. Not much came up. A few public records, an old photo in a local gardening newsletter, Margaret in her 60s, smiling next to a prize-winning orchid. But one headline caught his eye, buried on page 6 of a 2011 town archive. Reclusive botanist wins court battle over unlicensed seed exports. Luke clicked. The article was vague, but it mentioned something about unauthorized plant genetics, experimental species, and a dispute with a major agriculture company. No criminal charges, but her license had been suspended. Luke sat back in his chair. What the hell had they walked into? The next week, Emmie planted something new. It was a tiny seed, black and smooth like a polished stone, tucked deep in the bottom of one of the mason jars they hadn't opened yet. The jar had no label, just a strip of fabric tied around the neck. Are you sure it's still good? Luke asked. Emmie nodded. I think it's special. She planted it in a spiral, smaller than the others, alone in a shallow pot near the center of the greenhouse. Luke didn't say no, he just watched. That night, Emmie had another dream. She told Luke about it the next morning over cereal. There was a woman, and she said, in a big straw hat. She didn't say anything, but she knelt down and pointed at the pot. Then she touched my forehead. Luke raised an eyebrow. Like a fairy godmother? No, Emmie said serious. Like someone who knows me, like family. Luke swallowed a bite of toast, heart skipping a beat. He didn't believe in ghosts, or spirits, or flower witches. But Emmie did, and she wasn't the kind of kid who made things up just for fun. 3 days later, the black seed sprouted. It grew fast. Too fast. By sunset, it had already broken through the soil. By morning, it had grown 5 inches tall, with dark green leaves that shimmered faintly under the light. The petals were still closed, but the stem leaned again toward the door. Luke couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was coming. The greenhouse wasn't just a garden anymore. It was alive. And it was waiting. The flowers started responding to her voice. It wasn't sudden. Luke barely noticed it at first. But after Emmie planted the black seed, she began spending more time alone inside the greenhouse, reading from the journal, drawing new spirals in the soil, and speaking softly to the petals as though they were old friends. Luke would stand just outside the glass, coffee in hand, listening. She wasn't babbling or playing pretend. Her tone was measured, gentle, like she was giving instructions. And the strange part, the truly strange part, was how the plants reacted. When Emmie said good morning and the blooms seemed to rise a little taller, when she asked them to sleep well, they softened and slowly closed. It didn't matter if it was day or night. They responded to her. Luke chalked it up to coincidence. Maybe it was temperature or light or humidity, any number of normal things. But it still unnerved him, especially when she started speaking in her sleep. One night, just after midnight, Luke passed by Emmie's room to check on her and heard her murmuring. He paused by the door. Her voice was low and rhythmic, almost like chanting. The words didn't sound like English, at least not any English he recognized. It was melodic, circular, like the sound of rain whispering through tall grass. He opened the door slowly. Emmie was asleep, her little arms resting above the covers, the old leather notebook still tucked under her pillow. Her lips were moving, but her eyes were closed. Luke stepped inside, gently touched her forehead. Hey, baby, you're dreaming. The words stopped instantly. Her body relaxed deeper into the sheets. Luke stood there a while longer, the notebook in his hand. When he finally flipped it open, a dried petal fell out, charcoal gray with silver threading along the edge. It wasn't from any flower in their greenhouse. He didn't remember seeing it before, and something about it made him slide it back inside the journal without another word. By the following week, the greenhouse had changed again. The strange black seed plant, Emmie had named it Whisper, was now over 3 feet tall. Its petals remained tightly closed, even though its stem had turned the color of wet ash. No one could identify it, not even the online gardening forums Luke reluctantly joined. Possibly a night-blooming cereus, one guy guessed. Looks like a hybrid pitcher plant, another commented. Careful, it could be carnivorous. Luke didn't reply to any of them, because none of their guesses came close. Whisper didn't grow toward the sun. It grew toward sound. Whenever Emmie sang, it leaned toward her. When she spoke, it tilted its bloom in her direction like it was listening. And then, without warning, the other flowers followed suit. Luke tried to keep it quiet. He turned away reporters, deleted most of the comments piling up on the greenhouse's accidental Instagram page, and stopped posting updates altogether. But people still came. They drove hours just to take photos near the gate. Some brought candles and stood in circles like they were attending a ritual. One woman cried when she saw the flowers and claimed they healed her migraines. Luke knew he should shut the whole thing down, but Emmie was happy, truly happy, for the first time in years. She laughed again, slept well, hugged him more. Still, one part of him, the protective dad part, was bracing for the other shoe to drop. It always did. One Saturday afternoon, while Emmie was at a friend's birthday party in town, Luke decided to do a little digging. He brought a spade, a flashlight, in his stubborn sense of something ain't right, and started quietly poking around the edges of the greenhouse. He hadn't done a full sweep of the property since they inherited it. The place had felt too sacred to disturb. But today something compelled him. Behind the greenhouse, hidden beneath layers of ivy and brush, he found a rotted wooden door buried in the hillside. A storm cellar. He stared at it for a long time before pulling the vines away. The rusted padlock broke after 2 hits with a hammer. The hinges groaned like something waking up from a long nap. The air that rushed out was cold, wet, metallic. Luke stepped inside. The cellar was small, no more than 10 feet wide, and carved into the rock like a bunker. There were shelves lined with mason jars, bottles with faded labels, and dried herbs that had turned to dust. An old cot sat in one corner, half eaten by mice. But what stopped Luke cold was the photograph tacked to the wall above it. A little girl, no more than 10, standing barefoot in the greenhouse. Her hair was long, curly, her dress plain white. She looked almost exactly like Emmie. The back of the photo read, "Spring 1986, Wren's child." Luke sat down on the cot, heart racing. Wren's child? Was that a nickname? Or a title? Later that night, Emmie came home quiet, not sad, but thoughtful. Luke asked about the party. She said it was fine. Then she paused. "Dad," she asked, "have you ever had a dream that felt like a memory?" Luke hesitated. "Sure, I guess." She looked at him seriously. "Do you think you can remember something that never happened to you?" He tried to answer, but her next sentence stopped him cold. "I dreamed I was planting flowers in the greenhouse," she whispered. "But you weren't my dad, and the glass wasn't dusty. It was clean, new. There were different flowers. Some were blue like ice. One of them knew my name." Luke didn't speak. He just pulled her in for a hug. His mind raced with the photo in the cellar. Wren's child. Who had that little girl been? And why did she look so much like Emmie? That evening, while Emmie slept, Luke returned to the greenhouse alone. Moonlight poured through the roof panels, casting silver pools on the ground. Whisper stood in the center like a sentry, its petals still closed, its leaves silent. But Luke could feel something beneath the soil, a pressure, like the ground was holding a breath it didn't want to release. He walked to the bench and picked up the notebook again. The last page had changed. He knew it wasn't possible, but it had. A new entry, written in the same neat cursive, had appeared since that morning. The spiral guides, the child remembers, the gate is nearly open. Luke closed the book, jaw tight. He didn't know what kind of thing they had inherited. But it wasn't just a greenhouse, and Emmie wasn't just any little girl. Something was waking up. By the time October rolled in, the leaves in Wren Hollow had started to shift, slowly at first, as if reluctant to say goodbye to summer. Crimson edged the oaks, amber flared through the maples, and even the wind had a new chill to it, crisp and smelling faintly of smoke and pine needles. But inside the greenhouse, nothing changed. The flowers didn't fade, they didn't brown or wilt or die back like normal plants should in cooler weather. If anything, they grew more vivid, almost defiant. Color deepened in the petals. The scent of the air became heavier, sweeter. Even Luke noticed the difference. And Whisper, the strange black seed bloom, finally opened. It happened at dusk, as the last golden light of day filtered through the glass roof. Luke was standing near the door, locking up after clearing some tools, when he heard a sound. It was soft, like fabric tearing underwater. He turned. The tall, gray-green stem of Whisper stood still, but its bloom had begun to unfold. Not fast, but steady, petal by petal, revealing a center that shimmered like oil on pavement. Deep purples, ink blacks, flashes of green and indigo, shifting and rippling like it was alive. Emmie appeared in the doorway behind him. She didn't gasp, she didn't speak. She just stepped forward slowly, hands at her sides, eyes wide. "It's ready," she whispered. Luke turned to her. "What do you mean it's ready?" Emmie blinked. "I think it's been waiting. For us." That night, Luke couldn't sleep. He sat up in bed long after Emmie had gone to sleep, the photo from the cellar laid out on his lap, the words Wren's child scrawled on the back like a riddle that didn't want to be solved. He'd scoured the internet for anything on Margaret Ellis. Most of it was dead ends. An obituary from 2014, tax records, a brief mention in an old botanical journal, but nothing about a daughter. No family, no next of kin. And yet the resemblance between the girl in the photo and Emmie was too close. The same curls, same dimples when they smiled, same tilt of the head. It wasn't just similar, it was nearly identical. Luke rubbed his hands over his face and stood up. He walked down the hall, pausing by Emmie's room. She was asleep, tangled in her blankets, the leather journal resting on her nightstand under the soft glow of a moon lamp. He stared at her for a long time, then turned and walked back out into the night. The greenhouse glowed, not in the literal sense, not like lights or candles, but something about the way it caught moonlight made it look alive, almost humming with warmth. Luke unlocked the door and stepped inside, flashlight in hand. The air was thick and humid, almost tropical. The scent of blooming petals hit him like a wall. Honey, soil, citrus, something floral he couldn't name. Whisper stood at the center. Its bloom was fully open now, and in the dead of night it looked even stranger. The edges of the petals seemed to drink in light. The center pulsed faintly, not with movement, but with depth, like a well with no bottom. Luke approached slowly, then crouched. Something caught his eye just beneath the outer leaves, a shimmer of movement. He leaned closer. It was a seed pod, sleek, black, shaped like a tear. It was cradled inside the bloom like a pearl in an oyster, resting, waiting. Luke reached out a finger to touch it, and the entire plant recoiled. It didn't pull back like a scared animal. It snapped away, violently like a rubber band recoiling, thorns along the stem suddenly rising like hackles. Luke jumped back, heart pounding. His flashlight clattered to the floor, the beam spinning wildly across glass and leaves. When he finally caught his breath, the flower had gone still again. But the seed was gone. The next morning, Emmie didn't mention the flower. She acted like everything was normal. Poured cereal, packed her lunch, chatted about her school's fall festival. But Luke couldn't stop watching her. The way her eyes lingered just a little too long on the glass window. The way her hand paused, mid-sentence, hovering over a spoonful of Cheerios. After he dropped her off at school, he drove straight to the Wren Hollow Public Library. He didn't tell anyone what he was looking for. Just pulled public land records, birth announcements, archived newspapers, and anything that might mention the greenhouse before it came into their lives. It took hours, but he found it. An old article folded into the back pages of a 1987 county record. A single column, nearly forgotten. Local girl missing after greenhouse collapse. No remains found. The article described a structural failure in the original Ellis greenhouse, long before the current one was built. Margaret Ellis's young niece, Lily, had been inside when the roof caved in during a storm. The story claimed she was presumed dead. Search dogs couldn't find her, but no body was ever recovered. Luke sat motionless, reading it again and again. The girl in the article had been 10 years old, just like Emmie. Back at home, Emmie was drawing at the kitchen table. Her sketchbook was open, filled with spirals, flower patterns, and symbols Luke didn't recognize. Some looked like stars, others like runes. Luke sat across from her, choosing his words carefully. "Do you remember when you said the flowers knew your name?" he asked. Emmie nodded without looking up. "What did you mean by that?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she flipped the sketchbook around and pushed it toward him. There, drawn in pencil with surprising precision, was Whisper. The flower in the center, its petals stretched wide and cradled in its heart. A seed. Beneath it, Emmie had written, "Do not plant the last one." Luke's chest tightened. "Where is it now? The seed?" Emmie looked up at him with eyes too old for her age. "It's already planted." That night, the second bloom opened. Not in the greenhouse. In the front yard. Luke saw it just after midnight, standing in the doorway with a mug of black coffee and a restless mind. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the porch light, some wildflower catching the wind. But when he stepped closer, he saw it. A single black-stemmed flower had pushed up through the earth near the base of the mailbox. Its petals were closed, but he knew the shape. It was Whisper's sibling, or offspring. He didn't know what to call it anymore. He looked back at the house, the warm yellow light still glowing in Emmie's bedroom. And for the first time since this all began, Luke Whitaker felt afraid. Not because he didn't understand what was happening, but because some part of him did. The next morning, Luke didn't tell Emmy about the flower near the mailbox. He almost did, twice, but stopped himself each time. He didn't know how to explain it without sounding paranoid. And the truth was, he didn't want to scare her. She'd already been through enough. Losing her mom, starting over in a new town, finding comfort in this strange, gifted greenhouse. So he buried it, literally. At dawn, while the sky was still the color of cold steel, he went outside with a shovel and dug up the second bloom. The petals were damp with dew, their dark sheen catching the faintest hint of sunrise. It looked innocent, small, delicate, but the roots ran deep, far deeper than a single night's growth should have allowed. Luke wrapped the plant in a trash bag, tossed it into the bed of his truck, and drove 15 miles out to an empty field off Route 21. There he buried it again. He told himself it was over, but by the time he got home, 3 more had sprouted along the fence. That day, Emmy didn't feel well. She woke pale, her skin flushed hot, her voice weak. "Just tired," she said, trying to wave off his concern. But by afternoon, she had a fever. Luke sat by her bed, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. Her skin burned under his palm. "I'm okay," she whispered. "I just need to rest." He nodded, though the knot in his stomach tightened. Outside the window, the world looked normal. Sunlight streaking through pine trees, wind chimes tinkling softly. But something in the air felt wrong. Heavy, charged. When she finally fell asleep, he stepped outside to clear his head. That's when he heard it, a low rustling sound, like someone brushing past the fence line. He turned, scanning the yard. Nothing, just the greenhouse standing quiet and still, framed by the late afternoon light. But the closer he got, the more he realized it wasn't quiet at all. The flowers were moving, not swaying, not shifting with the wind, moving. Leaves twisted toward the sound of his footsteps. Stems turned, following him as he walked along the aisle. Whisper, now the tallest plant in the room, had grown another foot, its black-green petals pulsing faintly as if breathing. Luke backed away. Something on the bench caught his eye, the leather notebook, open to a page he didn't remember seeing before. "The child is the root. Protect her heart, and the garden will obey." His pulse quickened. He closed the book, shoved it into his jacket pocket, and hurried back to the house. That night, a storm rolled through Wren Hollow. Thunder cracked over the hills. Rain hammered against the glass roof of the greenhouse. Lightning strobed across the sky, flashing white against the landscape like the blink of a camera. Luke sat awake in the living room, watching the rain pound against the window. Every flash of light seemed to reveal something new. The outline of the greenhouse, the silhouette of trees bending under wind, until one flash showed something else entirely. A figure, standing in the garden, small, barefoot, hair plastered to her face by rain. Luke bolted upright, heart pounding. He grabbed a flashlight and threw open the front door, shouting into the storm. "Hello?" The wind swallowed his voice. Rain soaked him instantly. He jogged down the path, the beam of the flashlight slicing through sheets of water. The garden was empty. No footprints, no movement. He turned toward the greenhouse and froze. Inside, through the fogged-up glass, he could see the flowers glowing. Every bloom was lit from within. Faintly at first, then brighter, colors shimmering like embers underwater. Luke took a step closer. For the briefest moment, he thought he saw someone standing among them. A girl in a white dress, watching. Then lightning split the sky again, and she was gone. By morning, the storm had passed. The air smelled like wet earth and smoke from distant chimneys. Emmy was sitting up in bed, looking better, but quiet. "Did you sleep?" Luke asked. She nodded slowly, kind of. Her gaze drifted to the window. "I had another dream." Luke sat down beside her. "Tell me." She hesitated, twisting the bed sheet between her fingers. The lady in the hat was there again, the one from before. She was standing in the rain, right outside the greenhouse. "She told me the garden is trying to come home." Luke swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" Emmy looked up at him, eyes wide and clear. "She said the roots remember what we forget." Luke didn't go to work that day. He called in sick and spent the entire morning walking the property, checking fences, looking for anything out of place. He found something by the edge of the woods, a shallow depression in the mud, human-sized. He knelt down, pressed a hand into the soil. It was soft and warm, almost like the ground itself was alive. And right there, buried just beneath the surface, was another seed, smooth, black, identical to the one from Whisper's bloom. He didn't touch it. He covered it again, then walked back to the house with his hands shaking. Inside, Emmy was sitting at the table with the notebook open. The pages were wet, not from rain, okay, some through rain, but from condensation like the paper itself had drawn in moisture. She looked up as he entered. "Dad," she said quietly, "it's not just a garden anymore." Luke's mouth went dry. "What is it then?" She turned the notebook toward him. On the open page in Margaret Ellis's looping script was a new line. "Every seed holds a memory, every bloom a door." Luke stared at it, the words bleeding slightly where the ink had run. "What kind of door?" he whispered. Emmy pointed out the window toward the greenhouse. "One that doesn't stay closed." That night, he dreamed of the photograph. The little girl, Wren's child, standing barefoot in the greenhouse, smiling. But in the dream, the photo didn't stay still. The girl moved. She lifted her hand and pressed it against the glass. And when Luke looked closer, he saw Emmy's reflection standing beside her, both of them staring back at him. He woke with a start, drenched in sweat. The clock read 3:11 a.m. He stumbled into the hallway, the house dark and quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. He checked Emmy's room. Empty. His chest went cold. He grabbed a jacket and ran outside. The greenhouse light was on. He sprinted down the path, rainwater from the earlier storm still slick underfoot. The moment he pushed open the door, the scent hit him, stronger than ever, dizzying and sweet. Emmy was standing in the center, barefoot in the soil, eyes closed. The flowers around her swayed, slow and deliberate, as if responding to her heartbeat. Whisper towered above her, petals open wide, pulsing faintly with light. "Emmy!" Luke shouted. She didn't move. He crossed the room in 3 strides, scooped her up, and back toward the door. The moment he lifted her, the flowers went still. The light dimmed, the air went flat. Emmy's eyes fluttered open. She looked up at him, dazed. "Dad," she murmured, "I didn't mean to wake them." Luke held her tighter, his heart hammering against her small frame. "Who?" he asked. "Who did you wake?" But Emmy had already fallen back asleep. He stood there for a long time, holding her, the greenhouse silent again except for the faint drip of rain through the gutters. When he finally turned to leave, something caught his eye. The soil where she'd been standing. A new sprout had appeared. Small, black, twisting toward the sky, and beside it, written faintly in the dirt as if traced by a fingertip, were 3 words. "She remembers now." The next morning, Emmy didn't remember being in the greenhouse. She sat at the kitchen table, sipping warm apple cider from a mug with little foxes on it, her hair still tangled from sleep. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried the foggy glaze of someone who had walked through a dream and hadn't quite made it all the way out. "You said you saw me where?" she asked. Luke sat across from her, elbows on the table, hands wrapped around his own cup. "In the greenhouse, around 3 in the morning. You were standing in the soil barefoot, just there, eyes closed, like you were part of it." Emmy blinked slowly. "I don't remember going outside." "You don't remember anything?" She thought for a moment, then shook her head. "I dreamed of voices and lights under the dirt, like fireflies, but inside the soil." Luke said nothing. His jaw was tight. Last night had rattled him more than he wanted to admit. The new sprout, the black one, was still there when he left the greenhouse. He hadn't touched it, hadn't even gotten close. But something told him it wasn't meant to be pulled. Not this one, maybe not any of them anymore. Later that day, Emmy stayed home from school. She said she felt fine, but Luke wanted her close. He couldn't explain why, but every cell in his body was shouting the same thing. Don't leave her alone. So she curled up on the living room couch with a blanket and the leather notebook, flipping through it like it was a fairy tale. Luke made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, trying to play it casual. But he kept glancing out the window. The greenhouse sat in perfect silence across the yard, almost too still, as if waiting for something to happen. At one point, Emmy looked up and asked, "Do you think plants can think?" Luke raised an eyebrow. "What kind of question is that?" "I don't know," she said. "The journal talks about root memory, like the dirt remembers. And sometimes I wonder, maybe the flowers do too." Luke wiped his hands on a dish towel. "Plants react to things. Light, water, sound maybe. But thinking?" He hesitated. "No, baby, they're not like people." Emmy frowned and turned back to the book. "Maybe people aren't like them." By sunset, the sky turned the color of rust. Luke stood in the backyard, staring down at the latest bloom. The tiny sprout that had appeared under Emmy's feet was growing fast. Too fast. It had tripled in size in less than 24 hours. He reached out, hand hovering over it. The stem quivered. Not from wind, the air was dead still, but like it felt him there. He pulled his hand back. That night, he returned to the storm cellar. It was still musty, still cold, but somehow it felt deeper than before, like the earth had stretched beneath it. The shelves were untouched, the cot exactly where he left it, but a new journal now sat on the table. Not the leather one. This was bound in canvas, its corners curled with moisture, the paper yellowed. He opened it. The handwriting was different, sharper, more hurried. She is waking, not just the girl, the memory. The land is listening again. Luke turned the page. In 1986, I tried to stop the process. I failed. Lily vanished without warning, no remains, no trace, but I never believed she died. Luke's breath caught. Lily. The girl from the missing person report. Margaret Ellis's niece. The seed knows where it belongs. It finds its vessel. It remembers. Luke snapped the book shut. When he got back to the house, Emmie was asleep on the couch. The leather journal lay open on her chest, one hand resting protectively over it. Luke lifted her gently and carried her to bed. But as he pulled the covers over her, she stirred. "Dad?" she murmured. "Yeah, baby." "I heard her again." He paused. "Who?" "The lady in the greenhouse." Luke knelt beside her. "What did she say this time?" "She said, 'I've missed your voice.'" The next morning, everything changed. Luke was sipping coffee on the porch when he noticed something strange. People were stopping their cars along the road. Not just a couple of curious neighbors. Dozens. Some were taking photos. Others were just standing there, staring at the greenhouse like it was glowing. Luke stepped out onto the lawn, shielding his eyes from the sun. From the outside, the greenhouse looked different. The glass sparkled as if freshly polished. Ivy that had once climbed the sides was gone. The air shimmered faintly, like heat rising from pavement. He jogged across the yard, heart pounding. When he opened the greenhouse door, he froze. Everything was in full bloom. Every single flower, regardless of season or stage, had opened wide. Colors richer than any he'd seen. Petals glistening as if painted. The spiral patterns Emmie had drawn in the soil were now grown into full formations. The air vibrated, thick with scent and warmth. But the center of the greenhouse held something new. A ring of blooms, black-stemmed and silver-veined, encircled a bare patch of soil. At the very center stood Emmie, barefoot, eyes closed, arms at her sides. Luke rushed forward. She opened her eyes slowly as he approached. "Dad," she said calmly, "I think I know who I was." They sat in the middle of the greenhouse, surrounded by silent petals and golden light. Luke listened as Emmie told him everything, or at least everything she could remember. "I think I was someone else before. I see pieces, flashes. I remember a storm, a fall, then nothing but the flowers remember, and they gave it back to me, like a story I forgot." Luke tried to stay calm. "Are you saying you're Lily?" She nodded slowly. "Not exactly, but maybe part of her, or maybe she's part of me." He didn't know what to believe. All he knew was this girl was his daughter, no matter what. "I don't care who you were," he said. "I care who you are now." Emmie smiled softly. "Then let's protect this place, together." That night, the greenhouse hummed like a distant lullaby. Luke stood alone by the porch, watching the glass shimmer under starlight. He didn't have answers, just instincts. He didn't know what this land was, or how it chose his daughter, or why the seeds responded to her alone. But he knew this. Something old had been buried. Something ancient had bloomed again. And Emmie, his bright, strange, beautiful girl, was at the center of it all. The frost came early that year. October rolled into November with a biting edge in the air. The mornings were colder, the wind sharper, and the sky more often gray than blue. Leaves turned brittle and fell in messy piles across the yard. Most of the town had started pulling their flower beds and buttoning up their homes for winter. But the greenhouse at 118 Wren Hollow Road remained in full bloom. No matter the temperature, no matter the season, the garden behind the gate stayed vibrant, warm, alive, untouched by time. And it was no longer a secret. At first, Luke tried to keep things quiet. But you can't hide a miracle, not in a town as small as this one. Word spread. Neighbors dropped by with polite curiosity. The local newspaper ran a front-page story titled, "The Garden That Defies the Seasons." Then came the TV crew from Raleigh, and eventually a national science magazine sent a writer with a notepad and a drone. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. How was this possible? Luke didn't have an answer, and Emmie didn't give one. She just smiled, polite and soft-spoken, and said the garden grew because it was finally home again. They had rules now. Luke had posted a wooden sign by the front gate. Private tours by invite. Only please respect the garden. Do not touch the black flowers. And strangely enough, people listened. Those who came left changed. Some walked through the spiraled flower beds in quiet awe. Others cried for no reason they could explain. A few said they felt like they were remembering something they'd never known they'd forgotten. The reporter from Raleigh called it the most peaceful place I've ever stood. But Luke never let anyone inside alone. The garden, he'd come to realize, wasn't dangerous, but it wasn't neutral either. It had a memory, and it chose who to open itself to. One night, just before Thanksgiving, Emmie woke Luke with a whisper. "Dad," she said gently, "I think it's time to tell you everything." He sat up, heart immediately thumping. They walked out to the greenhouse under a sky full of stars. Frost sparkled across the grass, crunching under their feet. The moon hung low and orange on the horizon. Inside, the air was warm as always. Still, Whisper stood tall in the center, surrounded now by 6 other black-stemmed flowers. Each one had a glow of its own, soft and silver blue. The spiral Emmie had once drawn in the soil was now etched into the earth, worn down by footsteps that hadn't been taken in decades. They sat together on the old bench. "Do you remember," Emmie asked, "when I said I might have been someone else?" Luke nodded. "I've remembered more," she said, "but not like a movie, more like flashes, feelings, a storm, being scared, a voice calling my name, and then silence for a long, long time." Luke said nothing. He knew this wasn't a moment to interrupt. "I think I was Lily. Not just Lily, but also Lily. I don't think I died in the storm. I think the greenhouse kept part of me, like a seed, waiting." Luke stared at her, every part of him wanting to protect her from this truth, yet unable to deny the calm in her voice, the clarity in her eyes. "The garden is old," she continued. "Older than this house. Older than Margaret Ellis. I think it came from before people wrote things down. But it only wakes up for someone who listens." Luke swallowed hard. "Why you?" "I don't know," she said. "But I feel like I've always belonged here. And now that I'm back, it remembers how to grow again." Luke spent the next few days in a fog. He still cooked dinner, still did laundry, still helped Emmie with school projects and picked up groceries from the co-op on Main Street. But part of him was drifting, torn between logic and belief, fear and awe. What if she was right? What if Emmie was Lily, or part of Lily, reborn through roots and soil and some force no science could name? And what did that mean about the future? Was she safe? Would she stay his? 2 days after the first snow, Luke found something new in the storm cellar. He wasn't looking for anything, just organizing tools when he saw the corner of a canvas sack peeking out beneath the cot. Inside were old envelopes, neatly bundled together with twine. Most were letters, faded with age, addressed to Margaret Ellis in looping handwriting. But one envelope was newer, not yellowed, not dusty, and it was addressed to the father of the girl who came back. Luke's hands trembled. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in black ink. "She was always meant to return. She is not bound by time but by love. Protect her roots, and she will never leave you." There was no signature, no date. But Luke didn't need one. He folded the letter and held it to his chest, standing alone in that dark cellar, breathing in the scent of old earth and rain. That evening, snow began to fall softly over Wren Hollow. Inside the greenhouse, Emmie placed a fresh sprig of rosemary into the soil beside Whisper's bloom. She called it a memory gift, said it helped the garden remember warm kitchens and holiday dinners. Luke stood at the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. For the first time in a long while, he felt peace, not because everything made sense, but because it didn't have to. This was their story now. A man and his daughter, a girl who might have been someone else, and a garden that never died. Thank you for following this journey through the greenhouse gift. Stories like these remind us that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about what we choose to nurture, what we choose to believe in, and what we choose to protect when the world doesn't have an explanation. Let us ask you this. If the earth could remember everything we've ever loved, what would it bloom for you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And thank you for being a part of this story.